I'm Jeannie McClellan Kisner, and my birth date is 8/21/47.
Where were you born, Jeannie?
I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Now, this interview is part of the Cane Hill Oral History Project, and we're asking everyone to acknowledge that they understand this interview will be for educational purposes and maybe rebroadcast.
Yes, I do.
So I want to be sure you're okay with that.
Certainly.
And the interview is by Scott Davis. So the first thing I want to ask you is, tell me about your parents.
My father was Charles Getty McClellan, and my mother was Juanita Treat McClellan.
And tell me a little bit about your family.
My family, the McClellan part of my family came here in the 1830s. I'm the 6th generation to live on the property here, and which makes my children the 7th generations. So we've always been here. We were in Alabama before that, and Virginia before that. My mother grew up in Marshall, Arkansas, lived in Colorado as a small child, and then came back to Fayetteville.
What about siblings?
I had one brother, John McClellan. He was 4 years younger than I was. He died in a car accident in 1973.
Okay. What are your early memories of Cane Hill? Earliest memories?
Early memories of Cane Hill. Well, there were always the family things, of course, and other than that, I don't know that I have Cane Hill memories before the school age, I suppose.
Well, let's talk about school.
I started to school here in the fall of my 4th grade. We consolidated with Lincoln. When I was in school here, we had 4 grades in one room, and it was anywhere from 4 to 6, possibly 7 people in each grade. So it had its advantages, because if I was in the 3rd grade, I could sit there and do the spelling words that the 4th grade was doing.
What was the routines like at school?
Well, she would get one class started on one subject, for example, and then while they were working on that, she could go to the next grade and get them started on something. I look back with admiration at someone who could manage 4 grades in one room and keep it going. But
Who was your teacher?
Well, my 1st grade teacher was Kate Finley, and then she was into the 2nd grade and she broke her hip, and we had a replacement for the rest of the year. Mrs. Reed was my 3rd grade teacher, and Mamie Pridemore from Lincoln was my 4th grade teacher.
And when did you start going to Lincoln?
I believe it was 1957. It was either 56 or 57.
Okay. Tell us about some of your classmates that you went from Cane Hill.
Well, it was Cane Hill. Of course, part of them would have been family members. The McGargles. There was the Remingtons and the Cochrans and the Biswells and the Spencers, for example. They went all through 12 years of school with me, even after we went to Lincoln. And then, so a lot of them I went through all 12 years with, as it turned out.
Tell us about what you remember about the history of the community from the time you were little till now, and how it's changed.
Well, of course, Cane Hill, I've always said, was like growing up 100 years in the past. Everybody knew everybody. If you weren't connected to someone, you were connected to somebody who was connected to that person. And it was, in many ways, it was like one big, huge family sometimes. We had get-togethers. There were potlucks at the church or at the college building. There was a group, there were card parties. But there was always people getting together somewhere, and now that's totally changed. There's very few of the old families left, and you don't have that sense of community that you used to have.
When you were a kid growing up, what did you do for fun in Cane Hill?
Well, it wasn't anywhere that kids necessarily got together. If the parents got together, as I said, you had potlucks, you had dinners at the church on Sunday, and then children just generally played outside. Boys played, cowboys and Indians, and girls had their dolls, and you played just normal childhood things. You didn't have all the extra electronic gadgets and things that you have now. It was more of you used your imagination a lot.
What about the adults? What did adults do for fun besides the gatherings and dinners and stuff?
There wasn't much. By the time I can remember, there was only the one store in Cane Hill, and there was no other businesses or any kind of organizations here. So basically, it was an area of visiting, and as I said, the potlucks, the get-togethers. The women played bridge, the men had poker parties. And other than that, it was mostly just family-type get-togethers.
What about your family's business? What business were y'all in?
Well, my father farmed, and then in the 50s, he started a meat processing company. So we processed meat and sold meat and butchered for other people. It was called Shade Tree Packing Company. And so all the way up until the years that he died in 1971, and we had a meat processing plant going.
Did you work in the family business?
I helped with that. I wrapped a lot of pounds of sausage. We sold sausage to all the little grocery stores around, and I wrapped sausage primarily would be my job in this.
So did you get to know your neighbors really well through the business?
Oh.
Other people from the community?
Well, you already knew all your neighbors pretty much, so you met newer people through the business, people you might not have known, but as far as the community, everybody knew everybody. That's just the way it was. And as I said, you could go to church or come home with 20 people for dinner you didn't know you were having, or family members would come from each direction to meet in the middle at our house, or there was always somebody, especially in the warmer months.
You talking about dinners. What was your routine on Sundays? Was that big dinner time after church?
Sunday was always big dinner time. Sunday was the big dinner. You went to church, came home, had dinner, read the Sunday paper, and so often had visitors in the afternoon.
So you would have visitors into your home after church?
A lot of times, yes.
What about family? Would you go visit family, or did they all come together? Or?
You visited family a lot. There was always somebody having something in the family, yes. Because my father was an only child, but in my family, first cousin, 20th cousin, it was all the same. So there were always get-togethers, and it didn't matter, as I said, as long as you were in the family or a member of an extended member of another family, you were there. It was all one big bunch of people.
What about the businesses in Cane Hill?
By the time I was born, we only had the one store and the post office.
Whose store was that?
That was Shaker Yates' store, which is where the drugstore is now.
Now, what did they sell at the store?
There was feed, there was groceries, there was a little bit of everything. They even had material goods, packages of 4 yards of material ladies could buy to sew. There was some nail polish. There was your normal grocery things. Very limited variety, but there was a little bit of everything.
What would you do in the store besides purchase things?
Well, the post office was there too, so there was a post office.
Gathering place?
For a lot. You'd usually find somebody there you knew to chit-chat with for a while.
What about the mill? Do you ever remember the mill being in operation?
Not in operation. It ceased operation in the 1920s, I believe. So the mill wheel was always there. There was people climbed on it. They wrote graffiti on it. It's just always been there.
Let's talk about the transition from the school to the college, the restoration project. I mean, what do you remember about after the closing, when the community took over the building?
Well, the college was empty for some years. Then Miss Araminta Richardson, it was turned over to her for a while, and she had summer music camps there with her music students. And then it was empty again, and then we formed the Restoration Society to take it over to try to prevent its falling apart from neglect, and we would have fundraisers to make enough money to keep the repairs going and pay the insurance. So none of us wanted to see it just fall apart, but of course there wasn't really anything we could do other than the basics to keep it going.
How important was that to you and your family that we maintain the college and the other construction?
Well, since I grew up in Cane Hill with this huge sense of history being important, then it's very important to me that it not just fall apart. I think we've been very fortunate that this area has had so much of our history preserved, and I'm very happy that it's being more so than ever before, more done about it in terms of preservation.
Now, you're involved in the museum now, the new museum. How? What do you do?
I'm on the board.
What do you do?
We take turns keeping it open on Saturday. We come up with exhibits to have. We take in things that people want to donate. And in general, just promote Cane Hills.
Were you involved with the museum when it was still up in the second floor of the college?
That last year I was. Before then I was not. My oldest daughter, Shannon, who died in a car wreck in 1998, was on the board then. And so she was involved in it at that point more than I was. I was involved with the festival we have every year in general and helping with house tours, things like that. But the museum was a fairly recent thing for me.
Tell me a little bit about some of your neighbors in Cane Hill and some of your friends that you know here in town.
Well, by now there's very few people left. They're the old families, so there's not many of us Cane Hill people left. Dwayne Pyatt was one. Betty Coburn, her husband's family was from Cane Hill. The Brian Reed family, but there's very few left that were here when I was growing up. Almost all of the people are new people. They may have been here 20 years, but they were not originally Cane Hill people.
What do you think about the restoration project at the college that's going on now?
I am very, very pleased that we have had this benefactor who's taken over, who is restoring everything and the knowledge that it will continue.
What would you like to see him do with the college and the facilities?
I hope that it will still be available for local people to use if needed for various club activities or things. I hope it will be available for the public to be able to see, although I realize that will not be on a daily basis. But I hope that it continues so that it will be here in the future.
What else can you think of about Cane Hill, maybe that I haven't thought to ask? I mean, some of your memories.
Well, as I said, Cane Hill was like one big, you knew everyone and everyone knew you. You would do, if anyone needed something, you would be there for them, they would be there for you. It was a very close-knit group of people. I really miss the small town atmosphere that we had then, where everyone did know everybody. Now you don't even know your neighbors, and especially with the advent of cell phones, if your neighbor's cow's out and you don't know him well enough to have his phone number, you can't tell him. But I really miss that sense of companionship with everyone had with one another, and the get-togethers and the things of that sort.
When you were a kid, how often would you go on trips to Fayetteville or to Fort Smith? Or
oh, I would say we had relatives. We had relatives in Fort Smith, so we probably went to Fort Smith once or twice a year, and they would come here. Fayetteville, my mother's mother lived in Fayetteville, so we probably tried, at least in the winter months, not as often, maybe went there once a month, maybe. And in the winter, depending on weather, of course. But going to Fayetteville then was a big thing. It wasn't like people do now, where they might go 3 times in one day. Lincoln and Prairie Grove, of course, were closer. By the time I started going to school at Lincoln, that meant I was in Lincoln, of course, on a daily basis. But it wasn't a normal thing just to run to Fayetteville at the drop of a hat like you do now.
Why was that?
Well, it was just, for one, transportation wasn't as it just wasn't as easy. There wasn't as many reasons to go then. Now people go for the social activities and the movies, and then, as I said, entertainment here was people. Now it's going to do something, and it wasn't that way so much then. We had the local grocery store here. You might go to stock up to a bigger place, but not just because. My children's generation thought nothing of going to town 3 times in one day, perhaps. But then people were more economical when it came to things like gas or just money in general than they are now, I believe. My mother started working out in Farm Bureau Insurance in the 1950s, and so I probably went to Fayetteville more often then, because if she had to work on a Saturday, we would get to go to my grandmother's, for example. But as far as just going for the sake of going, people just didn't go that far away then for unless there was an important specific reason.
Do you remember the fountain in the middle of the street?
Not when it was actually there, no. I've seen all the pictures, but it wasn't there by the time I was old enough to remember.
Okay, I guess that'd be right. What else are some real memorable things from way back in the day you can recall here in town that might be different than they are now?
Well, as I said, of course, we had get-togethers in the college. We had, the church was much bigger then. We had several people. We're now down to anywhere from 4 to 10 on Sunday at our church here. When I grew up, of course, the church was full. There was a lot of people. We did have, when I was in elementary school, I would say, in the summer there would be music here. People would get together and do music out on the porch of the old drugstore building. When I was small, there was a softball teams. Or baseball. My father coached the kids' softball teams, or baseball, I should say. And so there were ball games in the summer. And so there was a lot more. There were more people in Cane Hill who got together as far as community things than there are now, certainly. And I do miss that.
What about businesses besides the stores?
That was all there was when I was growing up, was the store.
Was the canning factory?
It was, when I was very small was when the canning factory burned. I know it was there. I remember knowing it burned, but as far as knowing anything about it per se, it was when I was too small to really, just the fact it existed.
If you could tell us one thing about Cane Hill that we should remember, what would it be?
Like I said, the sense of community would be the big thing. The fact that everybody was there when you needed something, everybody was there, or you were there for them. There's a small town atmosphere, that part of it. The family get-togethers. I particularly miss the extended family things.
Okay, Jeannie, tell me about the McClellan family and how they learned about Cane Hill and why they decided to move here and live. Okay,
my great-great-great-great-grandfather, William McClellan, was in Tennessee in the early 1800s, I guess, in 1820. Then the family moved from Knoxville to Summerville, Alabama, and his son his son William had come to Fort Smith to be the Choctaw Indian agent in 1826. While he was here, he called his nephew. He got in touch with his nephew, Charles McClellan, who was an engineer, and had him come up and do some surveying outside around Fort Smith. So while he was there, he had heard about the area here, and he came here and decided it was a great place, and went back and got the rest of the family, and they moved here in 1833. Cane Hill was settled, for one, because there was an abundance of water. There was only over 100 springs within a square mile, which was an amazing amount of water, apparently. And the dirt here was very rich. Most mountains, apparently, are man-made or volcanic made, and the mountains of the Ozarks were actually mountains when the ocean was here. Therefore, the dirt is very rich because of all the sediment on the bottom of the ocean. Cane, for example, does not usually grow on a hill. Cane grows in the rich bottomlands, but here it grew on the hills because of the rich soil. So because of the water and the rich soil, and there was an abundance of game, this was an excellent place, they thought, to settle.
And what did they do when they first got here?
Well, they farmed. Then my great great-grandfather had a mercantile here, among other things, but there were several family endeavors, I understand, but farming and raising cattle and the mercantile and different things while they were here.
What else can you tell me about the early history that you know from your family history?
Oh, my family history. This goes back, as I said, they came here in 1833, and then that was my great-great-grandfather, Colonel John McClellan, and he was on the board, the original board of the college for 1834, and so he was involved in the college all the rest of the years, as far as I know. And he built, they had a house and they planned the new home before the Civil War, and then the war came along and they had to put it on hold. So the house I grew up in was built started the year after the Civil War, and it's known as the White McClellan home, which I lived in until I was 14. It's still standing. It has 8 fireplaces, 12-foot ceilings downstairs, and it's a remarkable house to have grown up in. But he was a business person, and he died in the 1880s.
What else can you tell me of interest about your family?
The ones at Cane Hill. The Historical Society had published a book about my family in the 60s called The McClellans of Alabama and Arkansas. Said the first McClellan in the book goes back to the 1743 in Virginia, which was Colonel William McClellan. And his wife was a Barbara Walker, and on her side you continue back through several different name changes of family members to the 1700s in Scotland. And of course, this is all assuming things were written down correctly over the years and things, but it's a fascinating thing to go back and read, which makes my children, as far as Cane Hill goes, my children are the 7th generation to be here. But my family evidently were quite adventuresome to have come here in the middle of nowhere.